Hello and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Stay-at-Home Speaker Series. Today's program is Rachel Carson, Inspiration, Legacy, and Challenge with Jean Cecil, Executive Director of the Rachel Carson Homestead.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, can you hear me?
You can, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And thanks to Jamie and all of you attending this program today. We really appreciate Hawk Mountain hosting this. I'd like to introduce someone who influenced me before I talk a little bit about myself. And this person introduced me to Rachel Carson. I knew one of the founders. Her name was Mrs. Ruth Scott. And actually, by the way, she met Rachel Carson. I only realized that a few years ago that I actually knew someone, first person who knew Rachel Carson. So that was kind of thrilling. So Ruth Scott, by the way, she was a friend and environmentalist colleague of a biology teacher back when I was in high school some decades ago, Miss Beulah Fry. And I'm name dropping here for those of you in Western Pennsylvania or wherever you are. She initiated environmental education where I attended high school, but she wasn't just a teacher. She was a real naturalist. I was reading a little bit from Paul Brooks, and he goes through different, his book, Speaking for Nature, and putting Rachel Carson in that context, but he talks about the real naturalists. And this woman was one of those. She couldn't just identify things outdoors, but tell you about their ecology, their legends from Native Americans, how they were used, just everything from insects to constellations. So she inspired so many dozens of young people to what Rachel Carson called the sense of wonder. I wanted to help define that sense of wonder because it's important. Part is our mission, and because it was important to Rachel Carson. So recently I met someone who told me that he is still amazed, curiosity from this, inspired by this woman. And he said, she inspired me by showing me a dung beetle. And he said, imagine that, of all things, a dung beetle. And he was just turned on to nature. But that was the power of her inspiration. And in fact, at least a decade after I met Miss Fry, Julie Battle, who's here today and will take you through the house, was influenced by her. So back then, Miss Fry introduced me to Rachel Carson's books, but it was hard to appreciate the world stature of Rachel Carson. You know, when you're in high school and hear that someone local, I mean, I knew her stature. It was just difficult to put together. So my life took, even though I was really passionate about nature study, my life took different turns. I worked in IT. I have a background in law, but I'm not an attorney. And I studied public management and worked in management. I also did a couple of small community projects on the side and worked with some nonprofit boards. So when I moved nearby to the homestead, I rediscovered Rachel Carson. And it made me wonder how I veered away from what I was so passionate about. But academic biology didn't really work, and I intended to study it, didn't really work for me. So I started volunteering at the homestead. I gave tours and I reread Rachel's books. And the more I read, the more I realized how true she was. And again, I'm still introducing all this, but I have great respect for the founders, the people who literally saved the homestead from the bulldozer. The homestead is a little house in Springdale, just in a residence, and it was left in a state of disrepair, but a teacher bought it after the Carsons left, and these founders, though, in the 70s, realized when the house was about to be bulldozed that they should save it as part of Rachel Carson's legacy. And the reason we think it's important is that I asked one of the founders, a woman who's in her 90s now, Mrs. Evelyn George, what's the message of the homestead? You know, people come here for tours. Some people want to look around because they like an old house. Other people are in love with Rachel Carson. Some other people never even heard of her. But so Mrs. George, Evie, said, well, one thing, of course, is Rachel's messages. She brought us the idea of interconnectedness, that you can't do something without it having some other impact in the world. The other thing is that somebody from a humble home came to change the world. And that's a great story for young kids today, especially. You know, that one person can have some power, can really make a difference. Of course, we all aren't as talented as Rachel Carson, but it does give some encouragement. The other thing that I take from Rachel's life is that she learned to network very early on. And it really helped her when she uh, got became a professional writer and actually a scientist. So when I came here, getting back on track here, when I have great respect for all the people who came before me with the homestead. Some people put a lot of effort into it and did great things, but the past few years, it had been neglected. So with my background, I thought, okay, I could add some value here. I could do something to help make the homestead, and this is an overused word, but to make it sustainable. You know, with the people who are interested, with the funds to keep it secure, so we can really educate and convey Rachel Carson's environmental ethic. So again, this is an opportunity for me to reconnect to my earlier passion and promote Rachel Carson's legacy. It's truly an honor, and we're happy to share her legacy. So the board has a lot to do, and we're motivated and pleased. We just have some new additions to our board, and Julie and Nicole are here to help share that with you. So Julie Battle is a new member on the board, and Jamie, I guess you're going to introduce Julie now, and I'll stop talking.
Yeah, actually, thank you, Jean, for sharing that and your passion and your connection. Did you want to comment at all between the connection between Hawk Mountain Sanctuary and the Rachel Carson homestead, or Rachel Carson?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, you asked me my connecting Rachel Carson and Hawk Mountain. To me, like being in Rachel Carson's house, when I went to Hawk Mountain, it was such a special adventure, not because it's a great sanctuary and I'm not, just all that you do, the education, the worldwide opportunities for interns. And I mean, it really inspires me in many ways. One, of course, is that Rachel loved the place. That adds another dimension to me. Let me continue on that line. Rachel was always a birder. When she was 14, I guess birder is the right word, right? It was when I was first starting.
The term birder.
I think anybody who is involved with Hawk Mountain knows what that means. But so Rachel wrote an essay when she was 14 called My Favorite Recreation, and it was about bird nesting. So she wrote something about, returning home gloriously tired, gloriously happy, because she had, followed birds through the woods. She had her little thermos, and she went with her camera, and she would follow a bird and then try to find its nest and take a picture of it. So that passion for her, that of being outdoors, stayed with her. And we won't go into all the details of her life. We can talk more about her biography if we have time. But as a young single woman, she ended up working in an office in Washington, D.C. And she met a person from Iowa, Shirley Briggs, who was also an outdoorsy person. And once they found that out about each other, they went to take a weekend trip. And of course, their first weekend trip was to Hawk Mountain. And actually, they did it multiple times. And so Rachel wrote, when she was watching the clouds at Hawk Mountain, a wonderful essay. And she compares, even then, she was so passionate about the ocean. She watches the clouds and she's talking about the currents and movement, comparing it to the water in the ocean. So that's, one thing that is so critical, I think, that Rachel got to have that experience. She got to escape the city every chance she had. And Hawk Mountain was her choice. Also, I almost forgot about this. When Rachel Carson was researching on Silent Spring, Hawk Mountain kept the information. Silent Spring was a bigger message than just DDT and eagles not being able to complete their nesting, and it was so much more. But the way Rachel reached people was through that. You know, our national bird is on the verge of becoming extinct, and we've got this culprit, DDT. So Hawk Mountain kept the statistics, and Rachel referenced that in Silent Spring, because even though Silent Spring is kind of a fable, it's factual. It's very scientific and factual, and yeah, without Hawk Mountain there to do what all they did over the decades, that would have been very difficult to keep that scientific credibility and foundation in Silent Spring.
Yes, and it's wonderful. You know, many people credit Rachel Carson as a driving force that led to the passing of the National Environmental Protection Act. So that's fantastic, which has so many implications to protect the environment all around. And it's so special that Jean, you and your board members, Nicole and Julia, are joining us today to celebrate Rachel Carson, because it, as we all know, it's the year of the 50th anniversary of the National Environmental Protection Act. So that's something to celebrate for sure. And,
right. Yes. Excuse me. This anniversary day was major. Unfortunately, the coronavirus changed everybody's plans. But that's again another point for recognizing that we don't control nature. I was looking up some information about it, and Dennis Hayes organized the first Earth Day. The first Earth Day happened in 1970. Of course, Rachel Carson had passed away in 64, but she's credited with being the inspiration. She wasn't the founder, but she inspired it. People became aware through her. The issues back then, I don't think Rachel directly talked, I shouldn't say this, I don't know everything, about the population, but population control was a big thing. Rachel, of course, working for the Fish and Wildlife Service, that was one of their concerns, is to help try to feed people. And of course, you know, Americans grew up on, you know, beef. So encouraging people to discover and eat seafood was something that was part of Rachel's job, even though she didn't like it herself. But so population control was a major issue, and so was pollution. There were in New York City, where they protested, they shut down, they banned all automobiles, and it was a very impressive protest. Dennis Hayes even says it was you know, bigger for one event than protesting the Vietnam War, which was going on at that time. But to have 1/10 of the U.S. population involved in something is just amazing to me. I mean, I would hope we can do that again. You know, maybe we can make this the year of, you know, of the Earth, not Earth Day, but Earth Year, because now we've got so many more and urgent concerns, like climate change, global warming. This is, it doesn't seem to have an immediate impact, but it does. And, you know, there will be, well, I won't go into predicting all that. I'll read about it. But Rachel Carson warned about this stuff. That's what I mean about her being so visionary. Back in the 1950s, she wrote about the impact of industry on our climate. And, you know, she was just so sensitive to everything that we were doing. And I think, too, growing up the way she did, it, you know, it certainly gave her a contrast, you know, a contrast of living in this small house, and it had been a farm, and then living in the city and all the conveniences, but all the change, you know, that they had. She certainly realized how our lifestyles were impacting, I want to say, the environment, but of course, without her, we didn't have even the word environment wasn't used the way it is today. So yeah, she helped inspire a lot of awareness.
thank you, Jean. I think everyone's really excited to see some photos and slides of the beautiful homestead. And I just want to comment that it was lovely. Last August, Hawk Mountain had a bus trip out to the Pittsburgh area, and we did stop at the homestead for a tour, and it's a lovely, lovely place. And it was wonderful meeting you and your team. And that was we also visited National Aviary. So Jean, if you would like to share your presentation now so we can share with our audience what the homestead, Rachel Carson's birthplace, looks like.
Okay, I've been having technical challenges, but
No problem.
Jamie's going to guide me through this. So be patient. There you go. I think this will do it. Okay, and I want to introduce Julie Battle. I don't know if Jamie, you wanted to let Julie introduce herself or just jump into the house?
Hi, this is Julie. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Springdale, and I've had a career as a computer person. However, I also, like Jean, got to know the local biology teacher and ecology champion, Beulah Fry, when I was a child in the local area. And although my family didn't live right here in Springdale, my grandfather started a business in Springdale in the 1940s. And then I personally moved to Springdale in the early 1990s, and I was very intrigued to find out that the homestead was still here. And a friend invited me to come and visit the homestead, and then I volunteered a few times, and then I really wanted to get more involved. And so we have some great slides for you to show you some of the local area around at the homestead and around the homestead. The main thing I want to emphasize to you as I show these pictures is that this was a humble house. And the pictures can give you some idea of sort of location context as I tell you more about the Rachel Carson family and some early experiences that she had that contributed to her later accomplishments. And in truth, you'll learn that more of her early experiences were ones that she had to overcome in order to accomplish all that she did. Now, this is not to say that the family was in abject poverty, but be clear, Rachel was not a child of privilege. So first of all, how did the Carsons get here to this house? I'm going to tell you a little bit about their family. I'll start with Rachel's mother, Maria.
I'm just going to jump through here. I will come back to the slides, but I just want to be in sync with Julie. Sorry about my interjection here. Go on, Julie. Sorry, it's all yours.
Rachel's mother, Maria McLean Carson, she was a school teacher, and she also had a college education. And when she was in college, she excelled in mathematics and music and also Latin. And she later got married, and when she got married, she stopped teaching. And her first child was a daughter, Marion, and her second child was Robert. And Marion and Robert were ages 3 and 1, respectively, when the family moved from an area outside of Pittsburgh over here to Springdale. So Rachel was born after that. So Rachel wasn't alive yet when the family first moved here. Now I'll tell you a little bit about Rachel's father, Robert. Now he was born on the north side of Pittsburgh. His full name is Robert Warden Carson. And he was a ham radio operator. And my late husband also was a ham radio operator. And I got to tell you, you have to be a sort of an amateur electrician to be able to manage all of the equipment that goes with being a ham radio operator. Rachel's father, for a while, he had several different jobs. He was working as an insurance salesman when they moved here to this homestead. And he later opened a small electronics shop just right across the Allegheny River over in an area called New Kensington. So you might think that Rachel's parents were farmers because they bought this huge property and were about 17 or 18 miles outside of Pittsburgh. But in fact, they weren't farmers at all. This was an economic venture. And Rachel's father was hoping that when they bought the house here in Springdale and the few acres around it, and when they bought the 50 acres surrounding that, it was going to be an investment. They were hoping to sell off parcels of land, and even the house itself was one that they had considered to be temporary. And it was already over 40 years old when they moved to it. There was no electric power. It was simple, it was plain. And you can see here in this picture, there was a barn outside, a chicken coop outside. There's a spring house where they got their water. No indoor plumbing in the house. And you know what that means? You see those two little boxes up there by the road? Yeah, outhouse. So that kind of gives you a picture of how rustic this was. There was no gingerbread or corbels or embellishments on the house. Now, a number of different things affected this family adventure. In the year 1906, the area of Springdale went from being a village to being a borough. And in that kind of municipality, taxes were levied so that they could put in streetlights and sidewalks in town. Unfortunately, the family never got any of the power. However, they were affected by the taxes. So that had a big impact on their business plan for selling off these properties. So I want to tell you more about the inside of the house. Rachel's mother, in order to help raise some money for the family, gave piano lessons. And she was, as I mentioned, in college, she excelled in music and she enjoyed it. So that would have been part of their family life. This is not the original piano. Unfortunately, the original piano didn't make it, but we have this donated one. So that gives you some context for the family. Another point.
Julie, may I add something here, if you don't mind? Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Yeah, the piano, I wanted to mention that we just had it evaluated, and it is, we were told it's a perfect candidate for restoration. So again, the Carsons weren't wealthy enough to buy one, but Maria's uncle bequeathed one to her, and we know from the woman who bought the house after the Carsons, it was exactly like this. And I've actually found old pictures. We haven't been able to restore them or display them, but of a little girl sitting next to this ornate piece of furniture, and then I realized it was the piano leg. So that's another proof that we do have the right model here. It's a Steinway box grand, and yeah, it told a lot about how the family lived. Okay, I'm sorry, Julie. I just wanted to put a plug because we're going to do some fundraising to get the piano restored someday.
Great, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jean. Could you put up the slide of the inside the pump house?
Yeah, let me see where that is. Okay, don't look until I tell you. Close your eyes. Whoops.
The spring house.
Sorry, folks.
A little white structure.
Okay, yeah, something happened. Oh, there's the pump house. Oh, there's the pump. Darn. Hold on. I know we have it. Darn. It is in this deck, isn't it?
Yes.
There it is. I'm sorry, right there.
Yeah. So this is how they got their water.
Yeah, the structure yep. And here's the original pump. It's still there.
Yeah, so the pump house is there. And Jean, if you go to the following slide.
Okay.
After that one. So this is in the living room, and each room in the house had a fireplace for warmth at the time. And so downstairs there was the parlor, and
okay. That's all we're showing you, the parlor. Sorry, you have to come and see the house to get a big review.
do
But
come
yeah,
to
the parlor was, sorry.
And if you go to the next slide after that, Jean, it shows the stairs. And so I just want to say a couple things about the stairs. They're rather narrow and rather steep and a little bit hard to navigate because there are some knots in the wood that are kind of buckling up. And you really wouldn't have been able to move furniture up and down these stairs. They even look bigger in this picture than they actually are.
Julie, in fact, the first board that wanted to put furniture in the house had to get it moved in through a window. They had to take out a window and get furniture in. You're absolutely right that it's too narrow for furniture.
Yeah, and when you go up the stairs, you definitely feel it. So these are a part of the original. So these stairs are quite old, and I'm sure you would have been up and down these stairs many times.
Yeah, it's funny. Someone came to the house and this woman said she was just so thrilled that I'm walking on the same steps that Rachel's little feet went up and down every day. And you can see how worn they are. Yeah, the original part of the house was built around 1850, so they are pretty old.
Yeah, so that was a used house when they got there, fairly rustic. So the stairway leads up to 2 bedrooms. And this first bedroom would have been one that would have been shared by Rachel's mother, Maria, and Rachel's older sister, Marion, and Rachel. And then the other bedroom would have been for Rachel's brother, Robert, and her dad, Robert. And in the bedrooms, they had what's called a rope bed. And there's some metal underpinnings that are held up by ropes that are affixed to the frame. And lots of people back in those times had rope beds. The beds were about the size, maybe 3/4 of the size of our beds today. And there were several different styles. Now, most people have heard the term sleep tight. And I always wondered what exactly that means. And it wasn't until I came to the Rachel Carson homestead that I learned that that refers to using a wrench to tighten up the ropes that affix the underpinnings of the bed to the frame. Because if you didn't tighten them up, then you'd kind of be miserable all night. Because if there's 2 people in the bed, they're both rolling down towards the middle, and collisions like that, it would make you uncomfortable, and you'd probably be tossing and turning all night. And there's another phrase that we've probably all heard: don't let the bed bugs bite. Well, little fun fact here, when people did their spring cleaning, they would go to the rope bed, and bed bugs tended to hang out in the place where the rope meets the wood under that mattress. And you would clear that out with kerosene. So that was probably a smelly, nasty job, but somebody had to do it.
We've got another little talking point here with what you see under the bed. I don't know if you want to touch on that, Julie, or?
Well, we mentioned running water in the house. Now, are you referring to the baby cradle or that little pot there, Jean?
It's a pot, and it's probably not clear in this picture, but back on the little dresser, there's a pitcher and bowl too.
Yes, yeah. You would have a pitcher and bowl for water to wash your hands and to freshen up in your room. And so that would have been a replacement for being able to have a sink to wash your hands and to keep clean.
Right. Yeah, and that was a daily thing, a daily event, to bring fresh water in and take it out. And of course, the chamber pot. So,
right.
Yeah, it was not very convenient.
Yeah, so I guess and we do have that example in the house. But yeah, chamber pot in an emergency, if you couldn't make it outside to the porta potties, or maybe you're too little, because the children were growing up there, and sometimes kids need something before they can get outside.
Yeah.
I told you how the family came here and a little bit about how they lived when they were in the house. And then next I'm going to tell you how it was that they ended up moving away. Rachel, after she graduated from high school, then she went to college and she was living at home. Oh, here's a sad picture of the condition of the house after they left. Rachel went to college locally and was living at home, but then after college, she applied to Johns Hopkins University in 1929. And so she moved to Baltimore to study zoology and then to focus on genetics. So her mother Maria moved there, and then the rest of the family moved there shortly afterwards so that they could combine resources and save money. So 1929, that was a year that was ushering in the Great Depression. And so that was one of the many influences on the family's scheme. So what happened is the family basically abandoned their house. They still owned it, but it was probably difficult for them to keep up with the property taxes. The whole venture for selling off the properties into parcels, it just did not end well for the family, and they were struggling to get by. Even when Rachel was at school and she was completing her master's degree, she was delayed because she was helping to support the family. At the time, that would have been her mother, and her sister Marion, who was divorced, was ill at the time. And then Marion also had 2 teenage daughters. And at that point, Rachel's father had been debilitated with arthritis. And let's not forget that the family would have lived through a pandemic. In 1918, the flu was taking many young people, and how horrifying that would have been for them to probably try to isolate or to experience that, and knowing that all the sadnesses that would have been surrounding that. So they had a lot of major issues, big economic issues, social issues surrounding that. Now, when they left the neighborhood, they were not too popular in Springdale. Their house was run down. They abandoned the house. Maria, Rachel's mom, never really fit in when she was here because she was an educated woman and maybe not. I have to say, living here in Springdale, I know it's sort of a blue-collar town. We have that culture. And so they might have thought the Carsons didn't quite fit in here.
Well,
So,
if I could add, Julie, I think part of the reason too, if you look back on it, I've read things that say, well, Robert didn't, succeed and all of that. And you're right that exactly there was the Great Panic and there was the railroad collapse and all these other things, all these economic downturns really impeded their trying to make some money. So they did want to fix the house and add, build something with electricity and indoor plumbing. But also Springdale isn't quite as close to Pittsburgh to have really benefited from all the growth of industry. But also, well, another thing too, as you said, Springdale's kind of insular, and Robert Carson didn't come here to be a farmer or, part of the community. He came here to make some money and build a nice house. And you're right, Maria was seen as kind of a snob because she was educated. Not many people went to college back in the 1880s or so, and even less of them, or very few of them, were women for sure.
right, so she would have been around, but didn't really fit in for that cultural reason. And then also Robert was taking the train every day into his insurance job. So he wasn't here that much, although he did borrow a car so that he could get Rachel to school over at Chatham.
Right. Yeah, I held this picture up here to point out too, when Rachel got her own room, her mother really favored her. She kind of put all her eggs into one basket. Rachel studied and she wanted to excel. And from her bedroom window, of course, this is a modern view, but she could see the spring house. And sometimes I wonder, seeing that every day, probably made her aware of where their water came from and where it was going. She loved to read English seafaring novels. So she said she would sit there and read, and she could imagine everything about the ocean except how it smelled. It wasn't until she got to actually go to the ocean that she, she got that sensory experience. And she was very concerned or motivated by being able to use all your senses. In fact, there was a blind girl who wrote to Rachel, and Rachel wrote back to her and encouraged her to keep writing about nature, because she probably had experiences that were strong in different directions than the average sighted person.
Wow.
Sorry, yeah. I don't know if there's anything else in
Yeah,
this.
I just want to make sure you show all the slides, Jean.
Okay.
Living here in Springdale, I can see the river from my house, and likely also Rachel could see a little bit of the river from where her house was. And it's not too
Right.
of a walk. I can walk down in less than 10 minutes down to the river. And I'll bet Rachel did often to go down.
Yeah. I wonder if I have that picture in here. I hope we do. No, I guess we don't. Of Rachel and her brother and sister at the river. Okay, so no, sorry. Um, so here we have the the little girl. Rachel's here. It's kind of hard to see, but she's wearing a little scarf on her head, and that's her sister Mary and Robert. Um, and what else? Um,
Oh, and the pets. You can't leave out the pets.
yeah, Jamie, you had asked me at one point when we were talking offline about what, some of the experiences with being at the homestead. One of the best things that happens is that you meet really interesting people. We've had a whole range of people. One time a couple came in from Chicago. They had read everything of Rachel Carson's, and they just wanted to take a peek around the house, be there. They visit it like a shrine, and just talk about her. Another woman came in from a neighboring county and said, I asked her, I always start with, well, what do you know, or what do you want to know, so I can focus a tour. And she said, I don't know anything about her except she must be famous because Pittsburgh named a bridge after her. And another woman came in, and this reminds me of it. She uh, she said, I'm Rachel's cousin. And I looked at her because that nobody had said that. I didn't know Rachel had relatives around here, but she was a cousin on the father's side. And she said Rachel used to visit every summer. And she said, I remember back in the 50s, women wore house dresses, but Rachel always wore a suit. She had cherry red fingernail polish, and she gave her a book, one of her marine books. They were printed in children's editions as well. And and the inscription said, I can almost quote it, something like, to Ruth, my youngest cousin, wherever you go, whether your backyard, the fields, or the shore, may your sense of wonder stay with you. And she signed it, your cousin Rachel. And I brought that up because I don't know how we're doing with time, but I wanted to bring up that idea, that sense of wonder. Rachel's editor, Paul Brooks, he described Rachel's sense of wonder as by the fact that she would invite him for dinner, they would talk, then she would go down to the tide pool, scoop up a bucket of stuff and spread it out under the microscope and share what she thought was all the beautiful little organisms, then scrape them back and take them back to where they came from. And he said that embodied her sense of wonder, and that is what inspired all of her writings, whether it was her marine writings or Silent Spring. And Bob Hines, he was an illustrator, and he describes the same experience. And he said whether it was morning, daylight, or midnight, she had to put things back where they belonged because that was their home, and that was the right thing to do. That was a diversion there, but I with this Earth Day, I wanted to bring that up, that Rachel's, let's see, our mission is our mission is to preserve and restore the homestead, but also to use it to educate about Rachel's environmental ethic and sense of wonder. And that environmental ethic really is almost synonymous with the sense of wonder, because it's a total respect for everything, every living thing and, in fact, non-living thing. So let's see. Let me just go through, and I think we did cover these slides. We talked about, yeah, there was an orchard, and this is what the house looks like today. Julie mentioned at the beginning that it looks impressive from the street because this part on the right is an addition, and you're looking up at it, but it's really very small. Each of these rooms, each 2 windows is 1 room, and it's only one room deep. And what else do we have here? Yeah, the pets. Rachel always had a pet. Usually dogs when she was little, but of course there were cats there. And this is the kitchen. We said it was 4 rooms, but in the back there was a lean-to kitchen kind of tacked on, and a porch that went to the porch that went over to, outdoors to the chicken coop and such. But a friend of Rachel's came from college and visited and said, she wrote to a third person that Maria was so gracious. She said, but I can't believe they still don't have indoor plumbing. So, and again, they had a coal, this coal stove burns coal or wood. It does convert to gas, and the Carsons did have gas lighting at some point and gas heat, but they had a dry sink, and Julie mentioned the outhouse. And again, the spring house looks like it's in perfect condition, but it does need to be repaired. You can see from this inside picture. Yeah, and let me see what else we have here.
Actually, Jean, can I interject? Because I
Yes,
just
absolutely.
the piano, and there is a question. I know we're going to do the questions at the end, but there is a question about the piano. Where did they get the Steinway box grand you displayed in the slideshow?
Where did we get it? There was one that had been donated, and it was in really poor condition, and it was auctioned off when a restoration was done. So I contacted the person who got it, and he happened to be moving. He does moving on the side for hotels or motels and all that. And he asked me if we wanted another one. So I got the board to approve it, finding one. And he found this in Butler, Pennsylvania. It was in an old woman's bedroom. And when I called the piano tech, somebody else had told me, a doctor who came to visit said, I've got the perfect tuner for you. Call her. And she was trained by Steinway. You'd love to get her hands on this. When I called her, I didn't know she had been to the homestead decades before, and she was very trepid about looking at it. She said, the one that was in the house when we came there, the one that the board had auctioned off, was held together with rubber bands, and strings had been replaced, and things were, someone tried to clean the cabinet. And she said, this is actually perfect that no one's touched it. That she liked the fact that the strings were not touched or anything. Yeah, it was just chance that we were able to find one, and she looked it up for us. This one was built in 1869. At that time, the original Steinway family from Germany was in New York and making them. So we do have a document on that. I will have to do some work on our website and put that kind of information out there, because yeah, we have the serial number and know exactly when it was made and who it was sold to. It was, yeah. I don't know if, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say I have a few more questions coming in about specific rooms if you want to.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so back to the picture of the horse. I know you had kind of said who was on the horse, but someone wants to clarify who exactly was on the horse.
So the 3 children. So this is Maria on the left holding the harness, the horses here. And this little girl, it's hard to see, but the white thing, the white area, I need a bigger cursor, I guess, but that's a little scarf on Rachel's head. So that's Rachel, and her sister Marion has the dark hair and braids, and she's actually sitting on the horse. So she would have been, if say, we'll guess if Rachel was about, what do you say, 2 here or 3, then her sister Marion was 10 years older, so she was 12 or 13, and Robert would have been 2 years younger. So yeah, the 3 children were on the horse. They did have a horse and buggy and drive it down to the local church, the Springdale United. Now it was the Springdale United Presbyterian Church, which had a traveling minister. They didn't have a full-time minister, and but Maria sometimes led the choir there. And someone commented that that's the only time you could hear Rachel singing. She was, you know, not not a very forceful singer, unless her mother was there and I guess encouraged her.
Thank you. So another question about the slide of the stove. Someone commented that it looked like an Audubon print near the stove, and could that be?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Very observant. Whoever noticed that.
Yeah, we had 2 of those, and I thought, well, the kitchen isn't the place for those, but yeah, we do have 2 Audubon prints. We found some things. Everything I think had been inventoried. There's I don't know if anyone remembers the Charles Schulz cartoon of Rachel Carson with, is it Lucy saying like girls need to have their hero? And it was, Rachel Carson, of course. And we have an original large copy of that. It's not a copy. I don't know what you would call it, but anyway, it's signed by Charles Schulz. So it was, that was surprising to see. We also have a lot of the the press releases from all over with Rachel's, her marine books mostly, but also Silent Spring.
Thank you, Jean. So someone else is bringing up a very good point. Will you please give information about your website for further information on the homestead? And they say, please and thank you. And also I'd like to add on that, if people are interested post-COVID threats to come out and tour the homestead, would you like to share some information about how they can do that?
Sure. Thank you. Our website is www, of course, rachelcarsonhomestead.org. It's RACHEL, and all one word, no punctuation, and it's .org. We do need to get some work on it. We're behind, and we are looking for both content and other updates to it. But we have on there, we are open normally every Saturday, and some people are hesitant to make an appointment, but we really welcome people to request it. We get a lot of people traveling there on Saturday. So ideally, if you have at least 4 people, we do, that's more convenient for us to schedule tours. So Saturdays, and by, I guess, we're on demand, you could call it. But of course, and we have a little trail. It's just a walking trail, not a hiking trail, but it's the Sense of Wonder Trail, and that's the same place where Rachel walked as a young child. So in that sense, it's very inspiring. And yes, you can email us at info@rachelcarsonhomestead.org. We do have a membership. Again, we're rebuilding our board's growing, and so we will handle and start to have more membership drives and things. We just got a new roof on the house. That was a major project. Because it is on the National Historic Register, we had to get the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission to approve it, and we went back and forth. So we are still working on the house, but really we want to be able to reach people through our website, through the internet. There's a Rachel, to encourage people to really grasp what her environmental ethic was, and how she encouraged people to be active.
Thank you, Jean. And also someone else, Yvette, also wanted to share with everyone. She says you have a wonderful Facebook page too, the Rachel Carson Homestead Association. So is that another resource that people learn about what you're doing?
Yes, you can sign up at the We don't email very often, and you can sign up through the Homestead website, but we do try to keep people informed through Facebook too. And thank you for pointing that out.
And then we have another question. Someone would like to know what river is close to the homestead.
The Allegheny River. The Allegheny comes from New York State, and it's a sandy bed river, and it meets the Monongahela and in Pittsburgh to become the Ohio. So Rachel actually, there's a story that she actually took a field trip when she was in college, a field trip, and it sounds like she was somewhere along the Allegheny north of here. It's very scenic and yeah, a beautiful place that she loved. Not as much as the ocean, but
yes, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And I'm wondering, were there any other comments from Nicole or Julie? I know that one of you has a background in environmental law. Any other comments about how Rachel Carson's work in Silent Spring has impacted legal aspects to protect the environment?
Hi, folks. This is Nicole Ryle, and I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you, Jamie. You know, you mentioned the environmental revolution that came about because of Rachel Carson and Silent Spring and NEPA, and you're exactly right on. I'm an attorney. I have been an attorney for quite a while now, and I've worked about 10 years with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and these days I do more education work. I'm an adjunct professor, and this is really something that I like to teach about as often as possible, because you're exactly right on. Rachel Carson and the impact of her work is just amazingly profound, not in Pennsylvania, but honestly throughout the entire country. Her ability to reach people at a personal level and to take all of the facts, all of the statistics, all of the science, and put it in a way that was actually accessible for the general public is what started this environmental revolution. And it's what really made all of the modern environmental laws of today. It all started with Rachel Carson. And her impact just continues to be felt with every new law, with every updated version of the laws that we have. It really wasn't until the 1960s, the 1970s, that there was any true environmental laws in this country, and it's directly as a result of her work.
That's so inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I'd like to add something, if I may, just quickly. One of the last things Rachel Carson wrote was a commencement speech to a college in California, and it's called "Of Man in the Stream of Time." And she talks about how we're changing things and how we just keep adopting things, and she was concerned that we are doing things just because we can. The context she was writing in, you don't really respect all the challenges that she had, being a woman, being in science, not having a PhD, and she was criticized for. But the fact that after World War II, we just believed in technology, and she, there were bigger DDT wasn't the only concern. She was concerned about, just the fact that we can split the atom does maybe not mean we should. No one, talked about nuclear waste, but she wrote about it in the preface to her 1951 version of Under the Sea Wind. Excuse me. So yeah, she did, she was aware, and she brought kind of, as you said, Nicole, there were no environmental laws, but she was concerned about everything, the whole scope. If I could, and the last thing I'll add, and I promise it's the last, is that when you think about everything that Rachel was challenged with, as soon as Houghton Mifflin said they would publish Silent Spring, lawsuits started pouring in against her and against the publisher. She was taking care of her elderly mother. She was suffering from breast cancer, and she wanted to keep that quiet because she felt that, that would jeopardize the credibility of and the importance of Silent Spring. But she wrote to a friend when she was closing up her, she bought a cottage in Maine, and we do raffle a week off there. We were lucky enough to get that. But anyway, so she was closing up her cottage, and she wrote to her friend and said, "Thank you for the beautiful morning, but most of all, I shall miss the monarchs." And she talked about the fact that they didn't know if they would return. And she said, we didn't mourn for them because their life was a beautiful and natural thing. So after all she had been through, she kept that, that sense of beauty in nature and respect for it. And it kept her going all those years through everything. And she developed that as a child walking around her home and discovering things.
Thank you, Jean. And actually, there's one more question I do want to squeeze in that just came in. What was her connection to Long Island in New York? It seems there, I remember that as a child at the first Earth Day celebration at my elementary school.
Oh yeah, that was very, very important to her. Even though she was a very private person, as I said, she had this network, and the Box, I'm trying to think of the names, Box and you know what? I'm cheating. I have a wonderful book here. It's out of print, but it's by her editor, Paul Brooks. There was a lawsuit in Long Island against DDT, and it brought up the reality of what was happening with DDT. I think, darn it, I'm looking for it here. But that was really important. Bach, Judge Curtis Bach, right, 210-215. We don't know, I don't know everything, but we do try to teach ourselves. Yeah, so yeah, the Bachs did have a, okay, I'm not finding exactly what I'm looking for, but if you email info@rachelcarsonhomestead.org, we'll let you know.
Thanks, Jean. Also, do you mind, because we're going to wrap it up, would you mind exiting the screen share? Because I would like to share
sure.
a photo I have of Rachel Carson at Hawk Mountain before we close.
I'm glad you have that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Jean, and also to Julie and Nicole for adding your expertise. So I just wanted to share this photo with everyone of Rachel Carson. It was taken in 1945 when she was visiting Hawk Mountain, and I just kind of wanted to highlight, the whole connection of Hawk Mountain with the DDT and everything. So when she came to Hawk Mountain, she was observing the migration, and she also had asked to see our records, as we have the longest running raptor migration count in the world, which allows you to see trends in the population. Are populations of species increasing or decreasing? And she noticed something when she was at Hawk Mountain and going through the archives. She noticed that they were no longer seeing, passing on migration, the young eagles or the young peregrine falcons. It was just the adults. And somehow the young weren't there during migration like they had been in the past. So it was through those observations and through our long-term migration data that Rachel Carson was able to deduce, wait a minute, something's happening to the young, they're not surviving. And she was able to link that mortality of the young raptors, such as the eagles and the peregrine falcons, to the chemicals in DDT, which was a widely used pesticide at the time. And she was able to show that actually those chemicals in DDT were weakening the eggshells of these raptors. And so the parent birds were actually killing their offspring as they were sitting on the nest and incubating the eggs, which they have to do to keep them warm, because the chemicals made the shells brittle. It was crushing the eggs. So Rachel Carson, amazing that she was able to link that together. So again, a huge thank you to our wonderful guests. Jean, it's a pleasure. Nicole, Julie, thank you so much. Thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. And please go visit the Rachel Carson homestead. It's wonderful. Get a guided tour. It's fantastic. So I just wanted to share some upcoming virtual programs we have coming up next week on Tuesday, May 5th at 4 o'clock. We have Happy Cinco de Mayo from Veracruz River of Raptors. We'll have our Cashmere Wolf joining us from Mexico. On Wednesday, May 6th at 1 o'clock, we have Migration Madness with Ridgetop Rachel. On Saturday, May 9th at 1, we have Digging for Answers, Uncovering Mysteries of the Florida Burrowing Owl. Wednesday, May 13th at 1, Citizen Science and You. And Friday, May 15th at 4, Raptor ID for Beginners with one of our favorite scientists at Hawk Mountain, David Barber. So again, to all our speakers, thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us this afternoon to celebrate Rachel Carson and the 50th anniversary of the National Environmental Protection Act. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.